my name's Glenn Carlson, and I run a training program here in Australia, which is based on the methodology of the best-selling book written by my business partner, Daniel Priestley. It's called Key Person of Influence. And essentially we run a training company that specialises in running a 40-week growth accelerator. When I was in my late teens, I went off the rails a little bit in Sydney. I'd had my original entrepreneurial sort of spark when I was about 15, and then I decided that I'd move into the drug dealing business.
Very entrepreneurial.
In Sydney. After about 2 years of that, it was a pretty wild, about 18 months, it was a pretty wild kind of ride, some pretty heavy people, some pretty heavy situations. Okay. And there was this one time, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll never forget this for as long as I live. But by that point, I'd taken quite a few different, explored a few different things. So I'd had a whole range of different experiences recreationally. And I had an experience which redefined my life from that moment forward. I was sitting there on the bed doing what I was doing, and then a second later, I was at least 15 feet above my body. And I was not high. I was present, I was poised, I was clear. I had more clarity than I'd ever experienced in my life. And for the first time I felt peace, because I didn't realise just how much anxiety had been building up in my system living that kind of lifestyle. Yeah. And it wasn't until I felt this presence and this peace that it was juxtaposed, and I could sort of feel that. And I had a vision of my future if I stayed on that path, and it wasn't pretty. Instantly, in that moment of clarity, I made the decision that this wasn't the world that I wanted to live in anymore, and poof, instantly I was back on the bed. The next morning, I gave all of the gear back to my business partner. Didn't want any of the profit, didn't want any of the money, just clean exchange back. I stopped smoking. I was about a pack a day. This is when I was late teens. Pack a day. I stopped smoking. I stopped drinking. Stopped taking drugs. I stopped eating meat. I've since gone back to meat, but I've stayed away from all alcohol. And I called my dad and I said, "Dad, off the rails a bit." And he said, "Yeah, I thought you might have been." And he said, "A mate of mine's trying to sell his boat down at Rushcutters Bay." This was in Sydney. Why don't you go down there and see if you can help? Because I grew up on a boat sailing around the world between the ages of 6 to 14. So went down to this guy. He was a wealthy man, had a partnership with a few other business partners, and they had a beautiful $3.5 million yacht down at Rushcutters Bay. So here I am going from the bowels of nightclubs, living like a night owl, to being on the yacht club at Rushcutters Bay. Anyway, I met this guy. Long story short, this guy turns out to be the Mr. Miyagi of my life. We would dust the inside of the boat to clean it, so it's all internal wood and all this sort of stuff, with little varnishing brushes, but tiny ones. So we're sitting there dusting, talking about life and spirituality and is there a God, is there not a God, what is this energy, what is this force that we all seem to feel and experience from time to time, but most people don't even recognise it, but those that do, there seems to be a change or a difference in that. What is this? Turns out he'd lived a life of jealousy and greed and excess and divorce and pain and suffering and jealousy and all this sort of stuff. And he'd found the zone, and he found it through a meditation process. But he never really talked about the meditation or the tool. He just talked about his life, and he pulled this stuff out of me. And anyway, after about 6 weeks, I made the decision that I wanted to go and do this meditation thing that he'd done, that had changed his life so dramatically and turned him into this wise old Mr. Miyagi. So I did, and it was a 10-day silent meditation. And
Vipassana yoga.
Yeah, Vipassana. Right? And that was the second time I experienced what you'd call the zone. I sat down. And they have 1 hour sessions. So 1 hour sessions with strong determination, where you don't move, you don't do anything, you just be. And so I sat and I observed and I did what they tell you to do. And then I came out of the meditation when the bell went. And I sat down, and it was before we'd had breakfast.
Yeah.
And when I came out, I was confused because everyone was going to lunch. Normally I'd struggle to get through an hour of meditation. This was 3.5 hours, and it went in the blink of 5 minutes. It was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. That was my first experience of time being completely relative, because I would have sworn to anybody that it was 5 minutes, as opposed to 3.5 hours. Purely focusing on what is disconnects you from what isn't, I guess. It was just a really, really interesting experience, and it gave a lot of weight to my practice. Well, it's evolved now for me, the zone, and how I get to it.
Yeah.
Because what I've come to find is I spent a lot of time in the meditation, yoga, searching for myself and purpose and all that kind of stuff, to the point where I started to get a bit jaded. In having a fascination and I guess a massive respect for Steve Jobs, reading his book, looking at all his videos, it became very apparent that he tapped into a lot of his power by understanding the intersection that he stood at. And Steve Jobs would often say that he's always stood at the intersection of liberal arts and technology.
Right.
And liberal arts on its own is just a bit vague. Technology on its own could be anything. But when artists and technologists come together to create stuff, that lit Steve up. Yeah. And this entire wide variety of industries from this one very defined intersection. And so I started thinking about what my intersection was, and realised that there was this vein of personal empowerment, spiritual woo-woo stuff, and then there was this other vein of entrepreneurship. I started my first business when I was 15 and have really never been employed since. When I am creating something that is in the intersection of entrepreneurship and personal empowerment, I'm lit up.
Right.
And I find I communicate with a lot of clarity. I find I communicate with a lot of authenticity. I find I attract great opportunities. I find I attract great team. I find that I get up and I'm excited about doing what I do. Shit happens, but none of it seems insurmountable. All of it just seems like the challenge of climbing the mountain type of thing. And we've got a whiteout, or we've got an avalanche, or we've got something that we've got to deal with on the journey to the summit. But it feels like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, purpose, I guess you could call it. And so I find those moments of grace that I used to only find in like a meditation retreat or something, but I find them while I'm actually exploring that intersection. And that's what I think connects me to the zone. It's by purely just trying to make sure what I'm doing is at that intersection of entrepreneurship and personal empowerment. The zone for me used to be like a very distinctive, there's been a dissolution of body and consciousness, and like it's all heightened up, whatever. It was all very intense. Since I've got very clear on this intersection idea, I find that it seems to be part of my day. I'm not trying to say I'm walking around as the Buddha, certainly by no means is that true. But by just focusing on that space puts me in a zone that naturally lights me up, and I think that's what the whole point of the zone is. It's where are you effective? Where are you lit up and enthusiastic, and where are you effective? And where those two come together, where you can be enthusiastic and effective, you're in the zone.